Welcome to Electorama Weekly. I'm Rob Lanphier, founder of the Election Methods mailing list, co-founder of electorwiki.org, and a longtime participant in the electoral reform space. I'm joined by Taylor Eigen Fisher and Carlo Estefano.
Hi, I'm Taylor Eigen Fisher. I'm a mathematician and approval voting appreciator. You can check out my stuff on eigentaylor.github.io.
All right. I'm Carlo Estefano. I am an environmental science major at Sam Houston State University. I'm currently focused on hopefully bringing approval voting to Houston, though I'm personally interested in all forms of single winner methods. I love Condorcet. I love Star. I obviously love approval. And yeah, that's pretty much most for me. I have a YouTube channel under Carlo Estefano, and that's it.
Cool. All right. So we had a script prepared for this week, but we decided we were just going to go off the roadmap a little bit and just talk about how we all got into electoral reform. And I'll start with you, Taylor. What was it that drew you to electoral reform?
Well, I've always been interested in like math and elections, and so one of the things that kind of got me into this was studying presidential elections. So I made like a site that has like interactive presidential election data back to like 1864. And so like elections in general was of interest to me. And that kind of really got me into it was some videos on YouTube there's one by Primer and one by Veritasium. Their videos on like election methods. Oh yeah, CGP Grey as well. All of those people, they had really interesting videos on different methods. And I was originally very dismissive of approval voting. I thought like, we got to have a ranked method, it's got to be expressive. But then eventually the thing that really got me into the space fully was I started reading the literature, and I read the 1978 paper by Brams and Fishburne. And so then that kind of sparked me going like, oh, wow, I love this method. And I started writing about it. And then I got into like Center for Election Science. I joined the Discord, and then I started going on SAS's calls. And then that's how I met these wonderful people.
Cool. So yeah. So what was it that originally turned you off about approval?
I thought it was too simple to possibly be good. I mean, like, how could just casting multiple votes possibly get you like good winners? It didn't make sense. So like when I was doing some coding projects, I was like, no way. RCV, Star, plurality, and like score. Those are like the main ones that I would ever possibly consider. I definitely changed my mind on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. So Carlo, I guess the same question for you. What was it? How did you get into this space?
Yeah, so it's interesting hearing Taylor's angle, kind of starting from that perspective, more of like mathematics, because if anything, I probably went in more from a curiosity, just like about structural incentives and just like structural politics in the first place, because I remember specifically I was in my last year of high school, and it was US Gov AP, and I had a really great teacher for that class. He was very, very interested in kind of that stuff that lit a spark in me. I watched from class. I watched these videos talking about kind of like the man, how would you say it? Like it's that famous graph where like the correlation between what type of laws actually get passed and the interest based on like wealth and class gets way closer. Like to the point where like you get to like the 1% of the 1%, and it's almost like identical of like what gets passed and what's an interest. and people like ordinary citizens, it was basically a flat line of representation. That to me, I guess from like an ethics perspective, I immediately was like, oh, this is the thing. We need to all band behind Represent Us, because like those were the people who were making the videos. We need to get behind their anti-corruption act, because I was really, really focused on like the ethics perspective and the money perspective. Then there were many things as I was learning more and more about that kind of questioned it for me, and I got way more interested in ranked choice voting. My heart was broken once I started watching like the Mr. Beat videos about how it's not that good of a method. CGP Gray, another great example. And also just generally just kind of this like naive aspiration to be involved in something that's high leverage politically, that's civically oriented, so it's not too crazy partisan, and actually like creates these long-term incentives that will bring us closer towards kind of, less gridlock, less polarization, all that good stuff. And I realized, at least logically or like theoretically, how important the voting stuff really is. And that kind of, began everything, talking to y'all through Sassa's call, joining the Equal Vote Coalition page. I got that from Mr. Beat. Was sort of what got me here. So yeah, it definitely was more of a structural angle, kind of a ethics angle, and my departure from the money side of things, the kind of like revolving door or disclosure laws or concerns about free speech or watchdogs, getting from that launching pad got me in this position where I've been really enthusiastic about voting reform and other structural things like primaries, gerrymandering. Not that the other stuff doesn't matter, of course, but that's kind of what got me into it.
Cool. Yeah, it's kind of funny how. So, did either of you go through an instant runoff or a ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting phase?
Very much so. I guess I'll let Taylor go first.
Well, yeah. I was kind of in the assumption, the trap that I think many people come into it with, which is like anything is better than choose one voting. I think that's kind of just said as an assumption without much proof. And I was totally in on that too. I was like, oh, choose one is the worst. And then I started realizing that logistical concerns, and also it just turns out the outcomes just weren't very good. So I eventually kind of tightened my approval threshold for good systems to not include ranked choice voting anymore.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I definitely had like a multi-month, probably like honestly multi-year kind of default ranked choice voting phase, and I think that is probably due to the fact that ranked choice voting from like the institutional reform, structural reform space was very much institutionalized, almost like I don't know how to describe it in another way. It was already so well established that people were like, oh, this will fix everything. Like I was at, for example, I was mentioning Represent Us. They had before they kind of switched more towards like national lobbying and watchdog stuff. They had kind of like a citizen initiative bottom up style with like their model legislation of the anti-corruption bill, which was just basically like a plethora of different ethics and money reform stuff. But they had ranked choice voting in there. In kind of like a fix our elections part of the page, along with other voting access reform stuff. And just like there was this kind of established culture of like, oh no, ranked choice voting is the answer. Like there was some creeping in like parts about like, oh yeah, we could care about proportional representation, this and that. But with that already established, I coped so hard through the mounting evidence of just like, wow, okay, that's not good for security. Oh, wow, that wasn't a really good outcome. Oh, that's probably really not good for getting us out of unrepresentative duopoly rule. And then eventually all that started compounding. And then, I got more assured from talking with folks like y'all who were already kind of in the space. Yeah, I did have like a really big RCV phase, just kind of from being sort of born in like an already established, I guess you could say, zeitgeist of like, hey, this is the thing, this is what we're going to rally behind, don't think about it, just it's good to go. And I know, Robla, that's interesting because I'm pretty sure you were watching that from the beginning. You watched it become kind of this institutional giant, this lobbying giant almost, with fair vote and everything. So
yeah, I mean, I guess we'll segue to me for a little bit. So here's how I got into this space.
Yeah, Robla, how did you get into this space? What was your introduction into electoral reform? What got you in here, and all that good stuff?
All right, so I'll try to keep this from being too long. But when in 1994, I had drifted left. I came from a very right-wing background, and then in 1992 for president, I voted for Ross Perot as sort of like the gateway drug away from voting for one of the two-party candidates. And I still stand by my Ross Perot vote, by the way. But what happened in 1994 was my representative, I thought she's a Democrat, and I thought, well, she's doing a really good job. Like, and I was still looking at it through kind of vaguely Republican-ish glasses, and thought, like, well, God, she's doing a pretty good job. I hope, and I voted for her and thought, especially because in 1994, the person who beat her was part of Newt Gingrich's Republican Revolution of 1994. And I then immediately thought, well, this is awful. The system must be broken. And invented or what we now call ranked choice voting in my head, and then thought somebody's had to have thought of this already. And it was the super early days of the internet. And so we didn't have Google. I think Alta Vista was new. So it was like the super early days of search engines. It was like search was a craft. And but I managed to find Center for Voting and Democracy, which is the folks that are now known as Fair Vote, and worked with them for a while. And my RCV phase was before it was called ranked choice voting. In fact, it was even before they called it instant runoff voting. It was called preferential voting. It was called single transferable vote for multi-party. And they were pushing, and the local organization, though, that was Washington Citizens for Proportional Representation, were pushing proportional representation and a single transferable vote. And I was all in for them for a while, and they had a mailing list where folks would discuss various like reform strategy, and there was somebody who was kind of annoying on the list who I decided, well, I'm gonna engage with this person. I'm gonna see, like, I'm gonna like finally put them down once and for all. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. And they ended up converting me in the process. I was like, oh God, they're right, because they described center squeeze to me. And center squeeze is a big problem with what we now refer to as ranked choice voting. And and so then and I learned about Condorcet methods, and then I wrote a Condorcet calculator, and there's a lot, and started the election methods mailing list. There's a lot of history I could go into there, but I'll try to keep it more brief than that.
No, that's great stuff to hear. I'm always charmed by hearing that perspective, because and I already said this before, I was kind of already sort of Well, I mean, literally, I was kind of already born into the mess because what you were talking about initially about what got you into this was 11 years before I was born. And it's great. It's great. I see you laughing, but like it's great that I can have that knowledge from you because it allows me to sort of kind of break out of the, I guess you could say, the bubble that was created for me almost, because what is this for people who care about structural institutional reforms? Like these organizations are already well established. They already have like whatever opposition they have, there's history where they've like really crushed it. Like they've really just like have not been very fair players or whatnot. And in other words, I don't know how else to call it. There's been propaganda. There's been strong propaganda. And you kind of were able to let's just say radicalize me in a good way, because I was able to really be inspired by sort of that story of yours. I'd love for you to keep going on about that if that's the direction that you want to go, Taylor.
Yeah,
if you're feeling that.
well, yeah. I mean, I could talk more about my linear history, but I think I want to go back further and just describe my understanding of the beginning of fair vote, because like the establishment, as I understand it, we think of fair vote as being like the establishment today, but they obviously weren't always the establishment. I think prior to them, there was the Electoral Reform Society of the UK, and who had among its sort of celebrity cast of advocates was John Cleese. And I remember seeing a video of John Cleese describing single transferable vote, and he was all about proportional representation, and I think still is. John Cleese of Monty Python and Holy Grail fame, but he was always big on on the proportional representation side, and then what happened in 1992. So I think a lot of this all comes back to the 1992 election. And I suppose maybe I'm the only one here who remembers that election. That was, that was a crazy election because Ross Perot. So there was three candidates. It was Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Ross Perot. Although before the Republicans nominated their candidate and before the Democrats nominated their candidate, there was a lot of craziness on both sides. Because even though George H.W. Bush was the incumbent, he had Pat Buchanan to the right of him, attacking him for not being Republican enough. And then you had, on the Democratic side, you had a large number of candidates that Bill Clinton eventually emerged over, but it took him a while. And Ross Perot entered the race. I don't think Bill Clinton was a done deal when Ross Perot entered the race. And so on the Democratic side, there was a lot of chaos. Well, on the Democratic and the Republican side, there was a lot of chaos. And then additionally, you had the Ross Perot factor where he was in the race for a while and then he dropped out and then he dropped back into the race. And while all of this was happening, my understanding is Rob Ritchie ended up becoming heavily involved in Democratic Party politics, and it was at a convention. I think it was at a Democratic convention, but maybe it was at an independent party convention, because now that I'm thinking about it, it could have been, I don't remember the party that John Anderson was in, but Rob Ritchie met John Anderson. John Anderson had run for president as a third party all the way back in 1980. And they were able to kind of be the sort of founding of Fair Vote in 1992. And for a long time, it was mainly Rob Ritchie, and Stephen Hill was the other main person there. And and Stephen Hill frequently showed up at meetings in the 1990s for the Washington Citizens for Proportional Representation, and that's how I ended up meeting him way back in the day. But yeah, it was it was a kind of a crazy time. I mean, we think of them like I think for a while, what we now know as Fair Vote was basically the Rob Ritchie and Stephen Hill show. But I'm not positive about that. They could have had more funding even way back then. But yeah, there's a lot of. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, a lot of that ground game kind of, and I remember Sass kind of adding to that conversation too. Whenever I was hearing about it for the first time, a lot of that beginning for Fair Vote, that it was kind of built around, if I'm not mistaken, it was built around the hope that eventually it'll wrap around to, like, oh, what we really want is proportional representation.
Yes.
Is that true? Am I getting that right?
I think many people involved with Fair Vote still are that way. Like they're like that is their thing. And just for listeners who are not, we've referred to SAS many times here. SAS is the name of a person who hosts a weekly video call at which can be found at democracydiscussion.com. You can find the invite for it and join us one of these weeks. We're always happy to have new folks in those calls. But yeah, it's been that early days. Like there was a day when Fair Vote was kind of the small underdog. They're kind of becoming the underdog again, I think, in some respects, although they've been fairly well established now in several places, and they've kind of they've stolen all the oxygen away from any of the other reform efforts.
Which is exactly kind of like what I was trying to point to, because they did that so successfully. They spent like probably 20, 15 years building that so successfully that like it requires like serious digging for like a little bit, or at least I could say maybe like 5 years ago. I think now the avenues are so much more open because of the work that y'all have been doing. But like 5 years ago, it really takes digging and like a lot of self-critiquing to get away from being RCV pilled. And that knowledge, at least like it's growing exponentially, which makes me really happy. But that knowledge, I definitely would have not been in the same position if I was kind of in your shoes and started off maybe in kind of like the late 90s, going off of like the Perot stuff. I would have probably had a different opportunity, that had RCV not being as established as kind of like the institutional solution, and I'm building a little bit of a narrative here, But it's just it's kind of it kind of goes to show like the differences in perspective, at least for me. And I hope that in that we can expose more people to the better voting stuff, or at least for us, what we coalesce around is like the better voting stuff. I think there's a lot of lessons there, which is inspiring for me.
Yeah, sort of similar to what you were saying, Carlo, is like I think the kind of people that you're around can also influence what kind of systems you consider. So, like for example, my brother was a hardcore RCV advocate, and he told me, it was like, oh, the Center for Election Science is so shady. They try and sandbag RCV, but eventually I converted him. He's approval pilled now. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious, Rob. One of the things that got me into electoral reform as well was kind of like the impossibility theorems, like Arrow, Gibbard. As a mathematician, like that really piqued my interest. I'm curious, like in the 90s, like how much was, or like back then, how much were people kind of throwing around or really talking about, I guess, like Arrow's theorem, or was that something that people talked about commonly or not really?
Well, I mean, I think I'm trying to remember now how I learned about Arrow's theorem. I think it was on the election. So I started the election methods mailing list in 1996. And I think it was there that I learned about Arrow's theorem. It might have been from Fair Vote or Center for Voting and Democracy or whatever, is where I might have learned about Arrow's theorem, because I think they probably did they probably did have that in their literature even back then, that there's no such thing as a perfect system. But I certainly came across it when I was researching for the article that I wrote for the Pearl Journal in 1996, which I ended up going to the University of Washington's library and poking around, finding papers and that sort of thing. And so I found like the Fishburne and Brahms paper, and I also one of the members of the election mailing list had, oh, there it is, provided me a paper which ended up becoming a very good primer for me. Looking for it now. Whoops. Yeah, so the paper I was reaching for was like, one of these days I'm going to scan it and give it, but it was like a draft paper from a guy named L. Bruce Anderson, which he was, and this is like a big thick notebook. Much of this notebook is Bruce's work. He was a big advocate for Copeland, which is a variant of Condorcet methods, and I got red pilled by that way back in the day. And it was much later when I was I eventually came around on approval voting, but like you, Taylor, I thought there's no way this can actually truly work. And yeah, it was over time that I was like, okay, all right, this hard time out exactly how it could fail. And
no, it's just like all that kind of reminded me of I despite the fact that once I kind of finally got my head out of the propaganda for a little bit, when I had my moment where like I realized I could think. I'm trolling, but like in that moment I'm so grateful that you with the ElectoWiki and also Equal Vote and Center of Election Science, doing this kind of situation, but especially equal vote with like the platform more specifically, and also SAS, kind of coming at the reform stuff with like the voting reform stuff with this kind of open mind of like, hey, there's actually like many great like practical uses for different systems. I am grateful that resource was there once I was able to kind of like finally like dig through the files a little bit, and it wasn't hidden enough where I really had to push through it because I honestly got into that through a Mr. Beat video, the maybe we were wrong about ranked choice voting video specifically. Like just having that platform ready was probably something that was probably the only thing that got me away from like being a fair vote goon, like and just like being an actual fed for fair vote. So yeah, and it's great because I think a lot of the knowledge that I obtained about this stuff was through the ElectorWiki. That was probably the most diverse, most like detailed, in-depth, catalog of most of the stuff because with there isn't a lot of a platform for this stuff. It's for us nerds for good reason, and yeah, I say that, but hey, it's breaking out into the zeitgeist slowly but surely. And yeah, just it always makes me happy to hear that perspective from Robla Taylor. I think that it's really cool that you're coming at it from a bit more of like the academic side of things. It's really awesome.
I'm kind of curious.
Taylor, I know that you had one thing that you were mentioning before the internet cut off. I don't know if you wanted to mention that real quick.
Oh yeah, I was curious if either of you had like a little like a niche system that you were kind of partial to. For me, like I was really fascinated by Borda at first because I realized that it's the candidate with the best average ranking, and then I realized how awful it is under strategic voting. But yeah, I'm curious if either of you had like a little moment where you were like, oh, this method that nobody seriously considers, oh, it sounds so great.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of them, so the first time I met Stephen Hill, he told me, I basically like described center squeeze, and I think I'm trying to remember which system it was, the name of the system. What's the reverse of instant round of voting?
Is it Coombs?
I think it was Coombs. There's one other one that's very similar to that. But yeah, Coombs is probably the one I'm thinking of. That he called it the Spokane method, and it was and he'd said that it had been used in Spokane, and Spokane, Washington. At first I thought he was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't like. Thankfully, I had the election methods mailing list because I was like, what is this Coombs thing? Sounds pretty cool. And there were a lot of mathematician types that were like, yeah, it's all right, but X, Y, and Z. And they kind of showed where like it failed Condorcet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd already been red pilled on Condorcet. So there you go.
Yeah. I guess for me, just to say, I guess briefly, I'll say two. I'll put the proportional one first. I am super fascinated by Marcus Ogren's. I don't know who else was there when they invented it. There was another person linked to that cascading vote, the cascading vote, which is kind of like I don't know how you would exactly describe it. It's kind of meant to be sort of like a spiritual successor of STV, but like whatever that means, but like in a less pretentious way than I'm phrasing it. It's putting a lot of importance on first choice votes. I think it's a really fascinating method. It fixes, or it hopefully fixes or addresses a lot of honesty or perverse, strategic incentives. And for single winner methods, what's it called? It's Smith's score. I think Smith's score is very fascinating. And I'm open to different interpretations of it or different variations of it, because I know that we kind of default on 0 to 5. I'm very curious about 0 to 9 or, all those types of things. So Smith's score definitely is an interesting one for me that I'm like, yeah, that would be cool to see in different places, maybe in an organization or something.
This is kind of minor, but a couple months ago, I was writing a blog post for April Fools, and I realized that if you consider Smith's score, but you change the number of tiers, exactly like you're describing, Smith's score, but you reduce it to 2 tiers, is actually just approval voting. So approval is a 2-tiered Condorcet method. And I know Raul doesn't want me to say that, but
I guess that's a very specific way. Yeah, I mean, there's a specific way that you're going, that your angle there is very specific, but I kind of see what you're doing there. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just more that you're obviously trolling the Condorcet folks.
It's actually Charles Munger Jr. He has a paper where he shows that approval is just Condorcet reduced to 2 tiers. So some Condorcetists, they know it's true.
Interesting. All right. Well, I suppose so. We should probably wrap up. So please join us again if you have stuff that you think we should be covering. Send it to news@electorama.com, or just drop a note on the talk page for this podcast. We will also we'll try to find all the links we referred to, because we referred to a lot of links here. We'll try to get those all aggregated on our show notes. And with that, I'm Rob Lanphier.
I'm Taylor Eigen Fisher.
I'm Carlo Estefano.
Thank you for watching Electorama Weekly.